Good afternoon and welcome. I am Melanie Ross, facilitator of this webinar today. Our presenter is Jason Stein. Thank you for joining ANAB for our complimentary webinar on minimizing risks to accreditation when on-site assessment is not possible. With the current global situation, travel restrictions, furloughs, and site limitations, the way that assessments are planned and performed has changed. I do want to note that the information provided today is from a non-forensic laboratory-related viewpoint. Lastly, we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for viewing in the future.
Some logistics before we get started. Due to the high attendance, everyone will remain muted during the duration of the webinar. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box. We have planned time at the end of the webinar to answer questions asked. Our presenter today is Jason Stein. Jason works directly for ANAB as a Senior Director of Accreditation, in charge of accreditation activities relating to testing laboratories and supporting programs accredited by ANAB. Jason has worked for ANAB as a manager and been qualified as a lead assessor for over 15 years, performing hundreds of assessments as a lead or team assessor. Jason has a degree in mechanical engineering technology from Purdue University and over 10 years technical experience working in various accredited testing laboratories prior to ANAB. He is involved with technical organizations such as ASTM, ASQ, SAE, AOAC, ACIL, and works closely with many state and federal agencies such as the EPA, FDA, CPSC, and DoD on technical and accreditation-related programs. Jason is an active member on various ANAB Accreditation Council committees for testing. He is actively involved representing ANAB internationally and nationally in accreditation activities with APAC, IAAC, ILAC, and NACLA. Jason is the ANAB Asia Pacific Accreditation Cooperation Delegate for MRA Council lab-related decisions and participates in various committees assisting in development of international accreditation requirements. Jason is trained and qualified as an ISO IEC 17011 APAC lead evaluator and regularly participates on evaluation teams performing international evaluations of recognized accreditation bodies worldwide. With that, I'm going to hand over control to Jason to provide us some insight into minimizing risks to accreditation when on-site assessment is not possible.
All right, thank you, Melanie. That was a very good introduction. Hello and good afternoon. I hope everyone is doing well. I want to thank you for your time today. Today we're going to talk about how to minimize the risk and the impact to your accreditation when an on-site assessment is not possible, which is happening a lot these days. Melanie, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my WebEx changing the slides. Do you think you could change them for me?
Yes, I can do that for you, Jason.
Sorry about that. Very good. So if you could just go to the next slide, please.
There you go.
Got it. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the current situation which has led us to this point where on-site assessments are rarely happening. What are the requirements that ANAB must follow that have an impact on your accreditation? How does ANAB decide the best course of action when planning an assessment in these times? How can ANAB assure confidence in the assessment activity so that a laboratory's accreditation can continue without interruption? What are some of the potential impacts on laboratory quality that ANAB is seeing right now? And what can you do to minimize these impacts? How can we work together in this, quote, new normal and move forward? What does the future hold for assessments? You know, these are the questions that I hope to shine a little light on today. Next slide, please. I don't have to tell anyone that these are extraordinary times right now. A situation like this hasn't happened in any of our lifetimes. There's no precedent. There's no validated SOP that tells us how to handle each extraordinary situation we find ourselves in on a daily basis. We're all figuring it out as we go and trying to make the best decisions we can in the moment. We do know that the health and safety of everyone is top priority. This is the first consideration ANAB uses when planning an assessment. ANAB and our assessors are trying to stay up to date with and follow all national, local, and individual business policies relating to health and safety. As you all know by now, these are changing rapidly and can be difficult to stay on top of. But I truly believe we're all doing the best we can in this moment. Right now, business as we know it has been turned upside down. The list of changes that we've all had to go through from January until now is endless. It's the same for ANAB as it is for everyone on this call. A huge part of the assessment and accreditation business is travel. Accreditation has been built on gaining confidence in our laboratories through face-to-face interactions and observations, looking people in their eyes and talking to them about their operations and seeing them in action. This is how it's always been done until now. With the current strict restrictions on travel and limited face-to-face contact, we've all had to make changes in the way we do business, all while maintaining quality. I'm sure it's been difficult for everyone. I know it has been for me. With that said, we must keep moving forward, doing our jobs as best we can. As long as the fear, uncertainty, and doubt remain high about the COVID-19 situation, ANAB is going to be very cautious with travel and performing face-to-face assessments. We're focused right now on performing assessments remotely whenever possible, all while maintaining a high level of confidence in the assessment activities and staying within our accreditation requirements. Next slide, please. So what are the accreditation requirements that apply here? So there's four main areas of requirements that are in play. ISO IEC 1711 2017 is the standard that ANAB must follow. It's the quality standard for accrediting bodies. It's the standard that ILAC and IAF will evaluate us against to confirm compliance and to maintain our international recognitions. We also have regulator, scheme owner, and stakeholder requirements that we have to take into consideration when we're making adjustments to our assessment plans. Then the ANAB, what are our rules and requirements, and what are our processes right now? So let me start with 1711. 1711 does allow for assessments to be performed remotely, but it still expects us to follow our normal assessment process. Assessment plans, opening meetings, issuance of nonconformities, daily debriefs, closing meetings, etc. All that stuff still expected to be used and put in place even during a remote assessment. 1711 also requires assessors to analyze all information and review objective evidence to determine competence to perform technical activities and conformity with requirements. Those are two big keywords there, competence and conformity. It requires ANAB to ensure that our technical activities representative of the scope of accreditation are assessed during the accreditation cycle at least every 2 years. And finally, one of the big ones, it does require that the time between on-site assessments shall not exceed 2 years. However, it does give us a big window of opportunity here, and it says that it'll allow ANAB and accreditation bodies to determine if an on-site assessment's not applicable. We can use another assessment technique to achieve the same objective, such as remote assessments. So I believe the worldwide pandemic counts as justification to use an alternative technique such as a remote assessment. So I think 1711 does allow us to change our plans and use remote and focus in on that. ILAC and IAF, they continue to closely monitor the developments, in the worldwide situation. They're very aware of the risks to the accreditation process, and they have acknowledged that the AB may be considering alternative arrangements to performing assessments remotely. So they're very aware, and they understand the situation, and they've not put up any roadblocks to ANAB or an accrediting body performing assessments remotely wherever possible. Although they do mention that alternative arrangements must not compromise the integrity of the assessment or accreditation process. So they also suggest we rely on advice and requirements from local economies to determine the best option. ANAB has accreditations around the world. Sometimes it's difficult to understand, the health and safety situation in each economy unless you talk to the local staff and the local accrediting bodies to really understand what are our options here. The third group is the regulators, scheme owners, and stakeholders. Of course, those are very important groups within accreditation, and it's been a challenging time for them. Most of the regulators and stakeholders, scheme owners, were built their requirements around an on-site assessment. Many of them that I've worked with on the laboratory side typically don't allow remote assessments and require on-site. So they're in a challenging time as well, and so they have been making exceptions. They've been reaching out to accrediting bodies such as an ANAB to help them understand what options that we have to continue the assessment process and move forward. I think they've been very good about understanding the situation. It's either work with us and see if we can't come up with an acceptable remote assessment process, or possibly do nothing. So I think that the remote option is the best one. Now, as far as ANAB and what requirements that we have, we're continuing to follow our normal assessment process and assessment cycle, and we want that to remain unchanged. We're still following our cycle. We still want to continue to follow our normal assessment process, including scheduling timelines. What's changing is the consideration of performing a remote assessment in place of an on-site assessment. So right now, remote assessments are preferred. It's almost the only thing we're doing at the moment is remote assessments. But ANAB will allow an on-site assessment if all health and safety rules and regulations are followed. And this includes the laboratories or the company's own policies and rules that they have in place for their staff and employees. So for an on-site assessment to happen at this moment today, all parties involved must agree to allow an on-site assessment. Assessors must agree, laboratory staff and the company must agree as well. So, any plans that ANAB puts together for remote assessment must be able to promote confidence, confirm conformance, and assure competency. That's key to the whole process here. Confidence, conformance, and competency. If a remote assessment can achieve these 3 C's, then an alternative plan will have to be discussed. This may include splitting an assessment into 2 parts, with a part 1 being a remote assessment performed on schedule, which may include as much of the assessment as possible that can be performed on site. And then a part 2, which is an on-site assessment, may be scheduled at a later date. Typically, a part 2 is used for technical witnessing that maybe can't be covered remotely, or is just impractical, or just not the best choice for an assessment to do the witnessing. So the part 2 will happen at a later date. It'll just be set aside, and we can perform that when travel can be resumed. How does ANAB make these decisions? Next slide, please. ANAB managers, with the assistance of the assessors, we use a risk-based approach to develop the general assessment plan and help make decisions about the most appropriate assessment techniques to be used. Factors that are considered include the complexity of the scope. Are all the activities relatively simple and straightforward? Are they very complex and detailed? Scope changes. Is the scope going to stay the same, or are there new activities that we've never witnessed before being requested to be added? Will a remote assessment allow for a detailed assessment to assure competency of this never-before-seen technology? How many sites and locations of the key activities are there? Are there separate locations where these activities are being performed? Can a remote assessment approach work at each one of these key sites or locations? What type of quality assurance program is the laboratory or the CAB using? What activities are available and used? Does your organization have a robust quality assurance program that ANAB can use to promote confidence and assure competency. We understand that established QA and ILC PT programs may not always be available for all scopes or all activities, and this is considered. What is your accreditation history, or what is the accreditation history that the business has? How long have you been accredited? What's the suspension history and the accreditation status history? What about the past NCs, PT performance, changes to the scope, staff changes, site additions? All of those things do add in to the decision making and the risk analysis process on deciding the best approach. And lastly, what is the stability of the cab? What changes have happened in the last year? Is there a new quality system that's been implemented, a new location, new scope activities? All of these things are considered when we're deciding the best plan to move forward in this time. It all comes down to the 3 C's we talked about earlier. What type of assessment activity is needed to promote confidence, confirm conformance, and assure competency? Next slide, please. ANAB must be able to maintain full confidence in the assessment process, even when performed as a remote assessment. The assessment expectations do not change. How can we assure this? Well, we've got some pretty neat technology available to all of us these days. We have WebEx, we have GoToMeetings, we've got Zoom, we've got video conferencing tools. So ANAB is exploring all of these tools to try to make the most effective use of the technology that's available. We don't necessarily need to provide the technology. If a company has an existing system that works well for them, most of the assessors have been very understanding and accommodating with using local business systems as long as the technology is appropriate. We need to be able to verbally communicate. We need to be able to use technology to view documents, ask questions, interview people. Document review portion happens ahead of time. This becomes a key piece of the whole process when we're doing a remote assessment, is to make sure that we have plenty of time, the assessors have plenty of time prior to the scheduled assessment to review documentations, which may include records. So there are some things that we would normally look at on site that it adds to the challenge of doing a remote assessment. One of those is record review. Many times records are hard copy documents. They're in clipboards, they're in binders. They're not always easy to send electronically. So that's something that needs to be considered in the decision to use a remote process. How's the best way to review those records? Documentation like internal audits and management review and technical SOPs. Those have typically already requested anyway, so they continue to be, but it just becomes more important that information is provided ahead of time. We need to make sure we can communicate effectively with the staff and all people that need to be interviewed. So pre-planning becomes vital. So the assessors should have an idea of who they want to talk to within your organization, what departments are the people responsible for certain tasks, so that we can make sure that they're available for interview, similar to an on-site process where you might just walk into somebody's office or you might have them come to you in the conference room. We still want to make sure that access to staff is available for interview and discussion, and that communication can be effective. Audio communication these days is generally pretty good. We're doing it now. I think it's been effective. Video communication on a computer, looking at somebody, that one tends to be a little bit more easy as well, where you can see the people you're talking to. But now when you get out into the demonstration of technical activities, becomes a little more difficult, because now we've got, at times we may have to move the video out into a laboratory, out into a different environment, in order for the assessor to truly see and observe the technical activity, and for that to be demonstrated. We need to make sure that we're choosing a technology that can allow that to happen. I can say that ANAB is exploring different types of technologies out there that will allow more mobile video assessment that can be used through cell signals or web signals and our Wi-Fi signals to be able to remotely view testing, calibration activities, technical activities that are being performed. So that seems to be challenges these days is how can we do a technical witness, a technical demonstration, which is equivalent to what we might see face-to-face, in person, on site, but do it remotely. So, those are the discussions that we need to have prior during the planning phase that happens between the laboratory, the assessors, and the accreditation managers within an ANAB to see what's needed and what can we use. We are finding great success right now in this time. I think laboratories and the companies have been very willing to want to work with the assessors and ANAB to try new things, to try new technologies, to demonstrate the assessment or the technical activities as best they can. Really working with ANAB, and that's really what it's all about. In order for us to maintain confidence, is that we really need the effective partnership in this technology and use of this technology with the laboratory or the customers to make it happen. Next slide, please. So ANAB understands that these are difficult times for laboratories to maintain typical business processes and timelines. We're hearing every day about new and unexpected challenges that the laboratories and businesses are facing. Some businesses are temporarily shutting down or have limited staff or are restructuring staff movements and interactions within your own company. Quality can be more difficult than ever to assure right now. Risks to your business are high in these difficult times. Calibration suppliers may not be allowed in your facility or themselves not traveling or under normal business operations. Access to other critical suppliers such as PT providers, reference materials, and maintenance providers may be limited or off schedule. What can you do to maintain quality? Well, you should first understand your risk. It's very, very important. The new 1725-2017 and the other standards have all incorporated risk analysis processes into the quality system. So this is really a perfect opportunity to use some of these new processes that have been put in place. Understand your risk. Have a documented risk mitigation plan. Address each risk individually, and communicate, internally amongst yourselves within staff and externally to stakeholders, regulators, accrediting body, customers, about what's going on. An example, many labs are facing an increased risk right now from the uncertainty around getting calibrations performed on schedule. I've been hearing this quite often lately that, it's been difficult. Either the calibration supplier is unable to perform the calibrations on schedule, either due to your company not letting them in the door, which is typically the case, or the customers just being on alternative schedules and not traveling themselves. So you may be at risk for an overdue calibration, and thus an increased uncertainty around your results and potentially a nonconformity within your system. This is a big one. What can you do about this? So you can perform a risk analysis. You can have a plan to perform checks or verifications on equipment to extend the interval temporarily, document the plan, and the results of the checks. Management review and internal audits are another good example. They may need to be postponed due to the availability of staff and unusual business operations. Understand this risk and have a documented plan to continue these activities as soon as possible. PT activities, proficiency testing, these may be delayed to supplier timing or internal disruptions. Understand this risk and have a documented plan to continue these activities as soon as possible. For example, our DoD ELAP environmental program requires PTs to be done twice a year for everything on their scope. So there's not a whole lot of time to miss a PT cycle if you can't make it. So it is a risk, and it's one that should be thought about, evaluated. If necessary, communicate with your accrediting body and the regulator to understand the plan of action moving forward. Another example, internal quality assurance programs may be overdue or lacking because of staffing issues or non-typical business operations. That we've heard examples of customers reaching out to us saying that they're having a hard time just keeping up on the routine of doing some of these QA work because they're understaffed and the business isn't operating under normal routine. So again, this is a situation where you want to understand the risk here, have a documented plan to continue with these activities as soon as possible. The key to maintaining overall quality within your business is understanding the risks and addressing each one individually. This may include the quality of your results or the impact on your accreditation. Next slide, please. Melanie, are you hearing me okay?
Yes, I hear you just fine.
Fantastic, thank you. The next slide, how could we minimize the risk to your accreditation and continue to maintain your good accreditation status? Work with ANAB to help us understand your concerns and keep us informed. We can discuss options. I think most of the accreditation managers now at ANAB spend a good part of their day talking with customers who are going through some tough times, as far as staffing and customers and supplies and things we've talked about. So talk with your accreditation body, work with us, tell us what's going on. We can come up with a plan. Let's plan ahead early. If we're feeling pretty confident that an on-site assessment is not going to be the best option, let's talk early. Let's start pre-planning that. Let's decide, what type of technology would be best. How can we do the technical witnessing that we need to see to maintain the scope, or possibly do scope additions and scope changes that you need to make. We just need to prepare for the change. We know that it's been quite a different process, both for the assessors and the customers who maybe have never done a remote assessment or never really planned on this in the past. And so it takes really everybody working together to talk about what's needed, talk about how we can achieve that, and implement that plan. The impact on accreditation so far, for ANAB and the customers that have gone through it, I feel like it's been a success. We've been able to transition on-sites over to remote assessments, with I won't say, early on, I think from the assessor's point of view, it may have been a challenge just to understand the assessment flow and how it works and find your rhythm on doing a remote assessment. As the assessors get more experienced and get more prepared, they can make it easier for the customers to be prepared, and that's done with pre-planning, discussions, trying out the technology ahead of time, understanding how am I going to view records, how am I going to view people. So we are able and have been able to perform most assessments remotely and still feel like we've maintained a high level of confidence in the process, assuring competency of what they've been able to observe, and confirming conformance with the accreditation requirements. Next slide, please. So I hope, we provided some good information that can help you understand the requirements that apply to accreditation bodies and CABs, how the assessment process must be able to promote confidence, confirm conformance, and assure competency, using risk analysis and mitigation tools to help minimize the impact on your accreditation, staying in close communication with your accreditation body, and letting them know what's going on. I think we're as far as ANAB is concerned and the managers, we want to help. We want to work together and continue the accreditation, be able to maintain your accreditation and provide any changes or anything you may need out of this. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Melanie, who's going to discuss some additional ANAB resources that will be of interest to you before we take questions. So, Melanie?
Thank you, Jason. That was a great presentation. I actually learned some things about remote assessments myself. We have had a few questions come through, and we will get to those after we discuss some additional resources available for accredited laboratories or laboratories that are seeking accreditation. ANAB has many different media to further your understanding of standards, accreditation, management systems, and assessments. On the ANAB website, there are free webcasts on a variety of topics. These webcasts are 5 to 20 minutes long, depending on the topic, and can be viewed at any time. ANAB also has a blog page with a wealth of information related to risk, accreditation, standards requirements, and many others. We are also going to have these webinars monthly. One upcoming topic will be ensuring validity of results, a review of Clause 7.7 in the ISO IEC 17025 standard. Next, ANAB uses the heads up to send information to their accredited laboratories. These heads up provide updates on documentation, policies and procedures, as well as general information for the accredited laboratories. All of the historical heads up can be found on the ANAB website as well. Finally, we offer training in the many areas, including internal auditing, standards, risk, and other topics. As with assessments, training has changed significantly with the pandemic and travel restrictions. All of our traditional in-person courses have been converted to online versions and include exercises and discussions related to the topic at hand. We also offer web-based, self-paced training. All of these resources can be found on the ANAB website at anab.ansi.org. Now let's get to the fun part, your questions. So the first question that came through was, what is CAB? And I answered that question in the Q&A box so that everybody would know during the presentation that the CAB is the conformity assessment body or the laboratory. Jason, the second question that came through.
Just on that real quick, just to clear that, we do have proficiency test providers might be on the call, or reference material producers, or laboratories. So saying a laboratory doesn't always apply to everybody, but CAB is the general term that 1711 is given to everybody. It is confusing at times.
Thank you for clarifying, Jason. The second question that came in says, if a Part 2 is needed to witness technical activities, how will that impact the granting of the certificate?
That is a very good question. So our intent is to get enough information out of the Part 1 remote assessment to be able to grant the accreditation based on that, with the understanding that a follow-up visit, a Part 2 follow-up on-site visit will take place at a later date. So we don't want to hold up granting of the accreditations. We don't want to have to issue long extensions of accreditation if your certificate is expiring. So that's really, we thought about it long and hard on how to address the situation, and the best scenario, if we just can't finish it all on site, is to split it into two. We will issue that new certificate and updated scope, at least as much as we can update with it before the on-site, and just set aside that part 2 for when travel can be resumed? Good question.
The next question is, what will be your decision if the lab did not calibrate its equipment because of COVID-19?
That's a good question, and I think we talked about it on in the presentation. So that is a real scenario that we're seeing and hearing from our laboratories now. So if you did nothing, we probably would issue a nonconformance. If you made an effort to do a check, a performance check, or a verification on your equipment to assure it's still performing within your expectations, and you've documented that and the reason for it, I can't imagine an assessor would cite a nonconformity if you've done your due diligence to try to maintain and show that that piece of equipment is still performing correctly. Question.
All right, we have another one. Are you concluding that remote assessment is equivalent to on-site?
Well, we would like to think it's very close, or we hope to get it to a point where it's very close. Personally, I mean, nothing is a substitute for a face-to-face interaction, walking into a laboratory, walking around, seeing, talking to people, having those face-to-face communications and dialogue, and actually observing them. But this remote assessment process is showing to be effective. We are able to have the dialogue. The technology is getting better, and both sides, assessors and customers, are getting better using it. So we're able to have very good communication and discussions about the processes and procedures and activities. We're able to share documents and look at documents information. The hang up, and I think the piece that's lagging behind a little bit, is how can we really do an effective technical witnessing when we have to either go out into the field or out into the lab. Technology is getting better. It is allowing us to do, I think, a pretty good job. I wouldn't call it equal to an on-site assessment, but in this pandemic situation, in this extreme times, it has been working. It's been effective enough for us to gain confidence in the assessment activity to be able to continue the accreditation moving forward.
Great. The next question is about training. Is info on the monthly training/webinar available on your website? The answer to that is yes. We do have a training catalog as well as a training calendar that show all of the offerings that we have currently online. As far as the webinar, that schedule will be up shortly, and it will be available through the training section of the website as well. The next question, Jason, is can you give an example of how to mitigate risk as per internal quality control?
How to mitigate risk for internal quality control? Well, an example just right off the top of my head, if you are having difficulties with getting proficiency testing samples and staying on your normal proficiency testing schedule, you may be able to increase the amount of internal quality control that you perform to fill the gaps between your external activities that you're doing. If you're having difficulty with staffing and people aren't able to stay on the normal routine and do a check of your equipment on each shift or each morning or each day or whatever it may be, you may have to take those into consideration and increase the frequency of certain quality assurance activities that you're doing. If you have identified a risk, something that you used to do and you're not able to do it at all or as frequently, what else can we do to try to address those issues? Calibrations, and we've had a few examples of customers not having access to be able to purchase the reference standards as quickly as they used to. Shipping has been a concern with getting them on time, and there's just everything is different now, and everything is delayed, and expectations aren't understood up front on some of these things. So without knowing a specific example, It really comes back to understanding what is the risk that we're in right now and what are some of these other things that we can do. And just to add into what Melanie had said a moment ago about the webinar that's coming up here in the future over Section 7.7, Assuring Quality, that's it. I mean, that section is vital to you and to being able to understand what are some of the options that we may have available to us to maintain quality and potentially reduce our risk that we're seeing right now. So it's a good question, but it's a hard one to answer without knowing some specifics. So I hope I did sufficient.
Someone asked if we can show the slide for takeaways again. So I'm going to put that slide up while you answer some questions,
Sure.
answer some of the other questions. We have here, does ANAB have templates for risk assessments that they could share?
We do not have a template for a risk assessment that we would have branded as our own and provide to customers. We have been talking about tools and things that we can develop and provide to our customers to help them understand requirements and implement within their own systems. So as of today, we do not have a document that's an ANAB document we can provide for that. But I will say that those type of resources are certainly things that we're looking into, and we want to be able to provide as many tools as we can for you to understand requirements and maintain your accreditation.
Great. Next question. Is this position for remote assessment shared across all accrediting business units of ANAB, such as forensic testing and reference material producer?
I can say mostly confident that yes, it is. The decisions that we've had about the performing of the on-site assessments and having a remote assessments be the priority is something that we've talked about at high levels within the company, but it is very specific to the business units themselves. So when it comes to forensics, I can't speak 100% with them. I know they have added challenges with doing remote assessments. It's certainly not as common, and the types of customers, the forensic customers, with bringing technology into those companies, those laboratories, it's a little different. There's different risks involved. So the answer is, we're close, but there will be some nuances and some subtle differences between the business units. The technology, and I'm sorry, Melanie, the technology that ANAB has been exploring and we want to provide to our assessors is common across all business units. So there are some tools that we're looking into, and we're hoping we can expand the use of doing remote assessments and making more effective use of remote technology. That does apply across all business units of ANAB.
So to follow up, is ANAB developing new checklist formats for the remote assessment variations?
For the non-forensic, for the labs-related group, we're not. The only checklist that may change, so the conformance checklist that goes along with the standards, say reference materials, PTP, 1743, 34, 25, 20, those are not changing. But we are in the process of developing some documentation preparation checklists that will help customers prepare for a remote assessment. There is more preparation that is needed to do an effective remote assessment. The clients would have to be ready to show records and provide information that normally would just be shown on site. So the checklist that we are developing would be more of a preparation or preparatory checklist. But as far as the standard checklist, there is no plans. There's nothing in the works to change from what we've been using now.
Great. The next question is, where are the blogs and training videos located on the website? For the training videos, when you go to anab.anc.org, you can do the drop-down to do web-based training. For the blog, right now you have to search the word blog on the ANAB website, and then it'll bring up the first link for you to be able to go to the blog. We're working on making it tagged to the main page, but it's not there right now. So Monica from Peru has a question. Would you like to know she would like to know if it is defined by any regulation the time that should be dedicated to remote evaluations.
That is a good question. So 1711, 2017, the newest version of 1711 does have some requirements in it for accrediting bodies that require us to have procedures and documented processes for determined assessment duration. So I can say, and as we're really diving into doing remote assessments more than ever, they aren't quite as efficient as an on-site assessment. So they do take a little bit more time on average because of lags in technology, and there's just things that are a little bit slower when you're doing it remotely. So what we're seeing is there may be a little bit of extra time added on. But the positive side in all of this, and this is a good thing for most everybody on the call, is there's no travel. There's no travel costs associated with it. So in general, we're seeing about a $2,000 at least reduction in cost associated with no travel. So it does balance a little bit. The remote assessment may take a little bit longer than the equivalent on-site assessment would, but there's no travel, so that's a pretty significant benefit. No travel costs, I should say, yeah.
Do you expect remote assessments to continue as an option after COVID?
We do. We expect them to continue. Now, whether or not they will continue at the frequency that we're having now is yet to be seen. I do know that ANAB top management is committed to, developing and refining our remote assessment process so that we can really be able to do effective remote assessments. This is a personal opinion on me, is that I think, a remote assessment for surveillances seems like a no-brainer if we can get it to a point where they're working equivalent and can provide the confidence that we need to. So without saying that all assessments are going to be remote, I can say pretty confidently that we will start seeing an increase in the use of the remote assessments and remote technology moving forward. There's some situations they just make so much sense, with scope expansions, if they're relatively easy scope expansion, or straightforward surveillances and just various other activities. I think it's going to be a great thing.
Okay, the next question. Our master needs calibration at NIST, but I could not get any feedback from them since March. What shall we do?
Oh boy. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to provide an answer on that one when it comes to to getting calibration activities through NIST. I'm not a metrologist, so I give you my best guess is that it would still apply to the quality assurance and verification processes that you have that we talked about earlier. But I really don't know if I have the solid answer on that one. I'm sorry about that. But I could find out if you leave your name with Melanie. We could maybe get some more information on that for you, because I know it's very important.
To follow up with that one too, someone asked, how long can we extend Golden Standards working standards as NIST or other national metrology institutes are shut down, and when they reopen, the turnaround time might be a few months?
Yeah, and those are good questions. And this goes into the same line that I have regularly as an assessor when it comes to calibration intervals. Calibration interval is determined by you, by the laboratory. It's determined by your data and by your equipment history and stability. So when it comes to how long can you extend an interval, there's a lot of factors in that. One being, how long have you had the equipment? How stable is it? Does it have is this a piece of equipment that routinely needs adjusted during calibrations? There's a lot of factors that go into that. So I don't have an answer that is a perfect one. I think the data tells the story on how long you can confidently extend that piece of equipment before a true calibration gets performed. If it's a new piece of equipment in a harsh environment and you haven't really used it very often, or if it regularly gets adjusted during the calibration intervals, I'm going to say that your interval should be pretty short before you need to get that external calibration. But on the other side, if it's very stable equipment that's rarely adjusted, that you've had for a long time and have a good history, I suspect that you could go, some time past your normal interval without bringing yourself into too much risk.
Okay, the next question. If nonconformities are cited on the Part 1 audit, would the certificate still be issued, or will you wait on the Part 2 on-site?
Yeah, great question. What we're doing is we're treating the Part 1 assessment as a contained activity. So if a nonconformity is issued, the expectation is that we would like to see the resolution, the corrective action responses be performed, and the evidence provided to ANAB. We will do, assessor will review those. We'll do a technical review prior to us issuing it. So the idea is that we would not leave those open, waiting for the Part 2 to happen. So we would issue them, close them out. With that said, we have seen a scenario where we had some complex nonconformities that we ended up working through a corrective action plan with some timelines and some dates that were accepted by the technical reviewers. And in this case, the follow-up visit was going to be an opportunity just to confirm effectiveness of those corrective action, that corrective action plan. But in general, it would not be the expectation would be that you perform corrective action like you normally would and provide evidence to close that out within the timeline.
We had two questions about cost, but I think that you addressed that when you were talking about the timing of the remote assessments as well. The cost is the same for labs in the case with remote audits, and will the cost change an assessment surveillance activity if it has to be split into two parts?
Good question. So the cost of a remote assessment, let me back up a little. The accreditation costs, so the annual fees and maintenance fees, those don't change. Assessor's time is really the big part of an accreditation cost, is how much mandate time is needed to complete the task. So our goal has been is if our original plan was to do a 3-day on-site reassessment, and we've now split that into a 2-part. We've been trying and successfully trying to do roughly half of that remotely, and what's left over using that for the on-site time. So we haven't had to add any time or add any additional costs to that. So I think the short answer is there has not been any additional costs to splitting up an assessment into 2 parts. We don't do a double assessment fee. The remote has no travel, but the Part 2 on-site would. So in general, I think that they are the same. It just takes a little longer to finish.
We still have a handful of questions, so we'll press on. We still have about 6 minutes left in the webinar too. If equipment is not calibrated on schedule but has not been in use due to shutdown of activities as a result of COVID and is recalibrated prior to a return to normal operations, would that be a nonconformance?
I don't think so. If the laboratory was shut down and it just was allowed to lapse, no activities were being performed, the equipment was not being used prior to its first use, it was calibrated. I don't think so. It sounds good to me. It sounds like we're okay there. I mean, I know our assessors and the ones that I've worked with, the ones we're talking to. I mean, there's some real considerations about the situation, understanding about what's going on. in the world and challenges that the companies are facing. So if in a case like that, if it just was left and it went out of cow because they were shut down or things weren't happening, and then you brought it back in before, um, I would count that as compliant. So I think I think you'd be okay there.
What happens if the PT plan is not adhered to due to COVID? They also ask about internal audits if they don't do their internal audits per their plan.
Yeah.
Different, but same.
No, that's very good. And we talked about those. Those are great questions. And those, a couple slides before, we had addressed those because we are hearing from our companies, hearing from our labs and organizations that these are happening. So the idea with any of those is that you as an organization take the opportunity to identify your risks. You know, what's happening here? We've got people, our staff isn't available to come in. We're not operating normally. We can't do an internal audit because we don't have people and they're just not available. So it's identified as a risk, the risk mitigation plan. What are we going to do about that? Well, we're going to schedule it as soon as we can get people back on the clock and back to a normal daily routine. So with any one of those extraordinary situations, they would be highlighted as a risk to your operations, documented, a plan established. And, you know, when you provide that to an ANAB assessor, I would think that that would be appropriate, you know, considering the situation that we're in.
Great. The next question is, I think they're asking, what is the difference between inactivation versus suspension for the accreditation in normal cases, not COVID time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in normal cases, a suspension is generally a negative thing. So a suspension is something that we place on a laboratory, say for not scheduling an assessment, not responding to a nonconformity. It's something that, you know, is typically not a positive thing. An inactive accreditation status is something, say you're moving your laboratory, moving your company, you need to be shut down for a few weeks. It's a voluntary status that you can tell us, hey, we're shut down for a couple weeks because we're moving a lab or whatever. We just need to put our accreditation status into inactive because we're not doing anything right now. And then as soon as you know, the situation changes, we go back into active status. Because technically, if you have an accreditation and your laboratory is shut down, we can't maintain that accreditation. So if you go into an inactive status, it's understood that, hey, there's something happening here. It's a planned event, typically, for a planned amount of time. And then once we've moved or fixed what we needed to or whatever the situation may be, we'll bring it back into, we'll talk to ANAB and bring it back into active status.
Okay, great. The next question is, what type of documentation would be needed for the off-site assessment if there is no scope change?
Well, it depends on what activity that was normally planned. So if we've got a few options, right? There's a reassessment, a surveillance assessment. We've got a couple different types of surveillance assessments. But for a reassessment, the type of documentation that they're going to want to see for remote is everything we normally ask for, quality manual, SOP, quality SOPs, technical SOPs. But now the records are really the big piece of information that we would want to make sure we had access to ahead of time. Training records, calibration records, you know, other pieces of information that, at least in my experience, typically gets looked at on site. So, you know, the primary change that we're seeing right now and the primary change in documentation is really how are we going to look at records? How are we going to get those ahead of time? You know, and one of the things with the remote process that we're finding, it's really working pretty well, is that it isn't just 8 hours talking on a mic. You know, the assessors are using small groups. They've been working about 2 hours with interaction between the organization. They may take a 30-minute break to review records and information. You know, you're interacting the entire time. You may be providing records that are requested kind of all throughout the assessment. So rather than sitting there silently, staring at your computer, waiting for the assessor to read a document, they take a break. The assessor does review, and then you guys connect back up a little bit later. It isn't uncommon to do smaller batches of the assessment rather than it be full 8 hours, maybe, especially if time zones are a concern. They may do 4-hour windows. So if you have a 2-day assessment, it may take, say 4 calendar days, doing them 4 hours at a pop. So the answer is all the documentation that we normally ask for, we still do, but we want some additional stuff like records that we would normally look at on site. We need to figure out how best to view that information.
Okay. I do recognize that we are a little bit past 2, but we'll keep going with the questions and answers. How firm is the 24-month interval between on-site visits by ANAB in light of remote versus on-site?
Well, ANAB's assessment 1711-2017 has the two-year window. ANAB's assessment cycle, it's a 2-year accreditation cycle, but it does require annual activities to be performed. So, with that, it's typical a reassessment followed by a surveillance, followed by a reassessment, followed by surveillance at 12 months apart intervals. The typical process would be an on-site reassessment, followed by an on-site surveillance, but a document review for that surveillance year is not uncommon. We call it a surveillance document review. I don't have the answer at this moment as to what the future will hold and how we're going to incorporate the increased remote assessment activities into the cycle. But I can say with confidence that they will be more. We're spending, ANAB spending a lot of effort and time, and we've all been put in this situation where we're forced to use remotes, maybe like it or not. This is what we have to do right now. And I think in the end, it may be a very positive thing for everybody by increasing the use of this technology, which can save time and money. So I know that's kind of a long non-answer, but our goal is that within a 2-year period, we're able to do the technical witnessing that we need to, whether that be, knock it all out in 1 year or do a little bit each year.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. How long can a laboratory remain inactive? Lab will be moving in the near future and don't know how long the move from one state to another will take.
That's a good question, and I think we do state that. I'm sorry I don't have my policy in front of me, but I think the inactive status is 6 months. So we would put you on an inactive status for 6 months. Anything after 6 months, and we would either withdraw the accreditation. With that being said, if you're in close communication with ANAB and your accreditation managers, and we really understand the situation, our goal always is to work together with you and your organization and try to come up with the best solution. So if you're communicating ahead of time and we understand what's going on and it's going to take a little bit longer than 6 months, let us know and we'll figure out the best way to handle the accreditation. Our goal here is that we just don't have somebody go in inactive status and they just stay there for an indefinite amount of time. So we've put a 6-month timeline on that. But I can't say that, we can talk about it if it's close.
Okay, last question. What happens if a test cannot be performed remotely in an accreditation extension process? Could there be another alternative?
Yeah, this is the daily question that we get, is that can we demonstrate, how can we demonstrate, in this case, a test remotely so that the assessor can confirm competence and conformance with requirements. And it takes 2 pieces of that. One, the laboratory would need to be able to perform the test, need to have the people and the staff and everything they need available to actually run it. And then we need to be able to have the ability to observe that test remotely in an effective way. If we can't do that, then the test, if it's a scope addition, would have to be put on hold until we can get on site. It's just very difficult for us to hold our hands up and say, yes, we can confirm compliance and competency with confidence and add this to the scope if we just haven't seen it or haven't been able to effectively evaluate that test being performed. So we're working as best we can in each situation to come up with a solution to that, because this has really been difficult for a lot of companies right now than ever. That people just need all the business they can get, and not being able to have something on their scope it can be tough. So let's talk about it. Work with your accreditation manager, and let's see what we can do. So we're making every effort that we can to be able to do that and still be held accountable by ILAC and within the requirements of 1711.
Great. Thank you, Jason, for the presentation and answering all of the questions. I also want to thank all of the attendees who participated in the webinar. If you have any additional questions, you can email them to training@anab.org, and we'll make sure that they get to Jason so they can get answered. If you need additional information, we have some contact information here, as well as the ANAB website. And then this presentation and the recording will be available on the ANAB website once the recording has processed. Thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Good. Thank you, everybody.